Guys, John Polemy here, Actionable Intelligence. Today is Saturday, February 1st, and this is the weekly market update. The disclaimer, anything that you hear or see on this podcast or video is not to be taken as investment advice. I'm not a registered financial advisor. I cannot give you individual financial advice. This is for informational purposes only. Please do your own due diligence. It's your money. It's your responsibility. Okay, just as this is going to be a short one this week because I'm recovering from the flu. We are in the flu and cold season, so bear with me if I am coughing or sneezing during this, but that's, and I just didn't have as much time to put into this week's video. So we'll go through what we have and we'll return strong next week. So this is what we're talking about here. This was from a tweet that Cuppy put up this week on Twitter or X. And it shows deficit projections in the top chart, right? This is your projected deficits going forward. You can see it was current Biden Congressional Budget Office. You're talking about having deficits as we go out, you know, this is the Congressional Budget Office determining this. And so, uh, again, this is with higher rates. You see this is like, you think that 2 trillion is bad. You're talking about 2.5 trillion or even $3.5 trillion by 2035. This is what I've been talking about. This is why, eventually the Federal Reserve is going to have to enter the game here and start monetizing the debt. They simply won't be able to sell this much debt. The problem is if you go down and look at the bottom chart is the interest expense divided by total tax revenue. So basically the percentage of tax revenue that's going for interest expense. And you see how this is slated to climb over time also. This is basically getting to the level that within the next few years, you're going to be at levels of debt and interest as a percentage of the tax revenue, which you see in places like Brazil or Egypt. These are, emerging markets. They have a lot of economic problems, and a lot of it's because of spending too much money, debt. And that results in all kinds of currency issues, economic issues, inflation, and this is what the United States is transiting to. So, although we can be hopeful that the efforts of this current administration to cut the debt and the deficits and try to slow down the amount of debt accumulation, that's not where the money is. The problem is, as I've said before, that 75% of your spending is things you can't change. They're entitlement spending and interest on the debt. And with interest rates poised to stay high and move higher possibly, and the fact that you have to roll debt at higher interest rates means your interest expense is going to go up. And so to say you're just going to cut the deficit by X amount, it's not possible because it's not discretionary spending. Social Security and Medicare are not discretionary. They're just pass-throughs. As people retire and get on the dole, uh, you have to pay. And so eventually, and I think that's what's starting to be realized as we get to this little honeymoon period, that this isn't really going to happen like people think. We're not going to control the debt. The thing is way out of control. It's been set in stone for many years, well before this administration. And again, that's another reason why I said the best thing would have been to let the Democrats win and, they would have had to wear this and they would have been extinguished as a party when they eventually had the collapse. Now, what's going to happen is a lot of promises have been made by Trump and a lot of expectations are built in, and I just don't think that they're going to be able to be recognized. The fact of the matter is the debt's going to continue to go up. Interest expense is going to continue to go up. Federal Reserve is going to have to monetize the debt. You're going to have higher level of inflation going forward. So I guess the gamble is, you know, well, if we deport all these people, we can raise wages here. And so even if interest rates or inflation, inflation is running at, 4.5 or 5%, people's wages are increasing at 7 or 8% or something like that. And then they're still gaining purchasing power, so we'll be good. I'm not sure it's going to work out like that. But again, I'm not trying to blackpill people. It's just a math problem. People don't want to acknowledge math and the way things are set up. Again, they're going to cut costs. They're finding all kinds of weird stuff, you know, shutting down these NGOs and all this free money that was going out and dumping all these employees that weren't doing anything for years. That's fine, but that's not where the real money's in entitlements, and they're just not touchable. So we will hit the brick wall, and then we will deal with the entitlements because we won't be able to be paid at some point. And so it'll be like Greenspan said during his congressional testimony when he was talking to Dr. Ron Paul. I can guarantee that the benefits will be paid. I cannot guarantee the purchasing power of the payments. So this is why gold has done well for the last 20 years, because people people can see this. This has been exacerbated. The running gold's up 40% in the last year because of the U.S. running around the world acting crazy. I have a chart showing this in weaponizing the dollar. Some of this is what you're seeing. I hope there is a real plan. I hope we're not just shooting from the hip, with these tariffs and all this stuff. The idea that you're going to go back to the 1780s and we're going to fund the federal government with tariffs and fees and stuff like that, it's not going to happen. You would have to cut the government by 90%. Is anybody really expecting that to happen? How is that going to happen? You'd have to cut the defense budget by 90%. That's not going to happen. I don't care who the president is. It eventually will happen because we'll go bankrupt and we won't be able to pay for this stuff. But who knows when that's going to happen? But this is stuff that people are ignoring. It doesn't matter who the president is or what they do, because the costs are in the entitlement programs, not in discretionary spending. So I said something changed in the gold market. This is interest rates, right? So you can see is inverted, by the way. This is the 10-year real yield. You can see, as I've said before, that up till recently, real rates is what drives the gold price. So when you have negative real rates, that's usually beneficial for the gold price. And they don't necessarily have to be negative. They can be moving from positive to negative, like you see back here. That's enough to get the gold price going. But you see something that's interesting that happened. We've had positive real rates since 2022, yet the gold prices went up tremendously. And why was that? Well, we see this basically what the reason is here, freezing of Russian central bank assets. And so the message was sent and received around the world that the United States, they don't like what you're doing. They will confiscate your assets. If you have treasuries, if you're holding, whatever your reserve asset, if it's treasuries, they'll freeze your accounts. They'll do all this stuff. So people are like, okay, well, we're going to disassociate ourselves from the dollar. And so, in U.S. treasuries and things like that. And so that's why central banks have been buying gold around the world, to disassociate themselves from an out of control U.S. government that is trying to hold on to its hegemon. And what's the proof of this? I mean, you have Donald Trump making threats. I saw a Truth Social post of his that all these countries, I'm paraphrasing, all these countries that are trying to create their own brick currency and drop the dollar. I'm telling you right now, that's not going to happen. I mean, this is, I don't know if this bluff is going to work, because the United States really doesn't have the ability to enforce this. Okay. And so I don't know what the plan is. I don't know if they're shooting from the hip. I don't know what's happening there, but this is concrete what is happening with these other countries. They see what's happening, and this is why they're buying gold. This is why gold's making new highs. And again, it goes back to what I said before. Retail gold, I mean, people in the West really haven't been buying gold yet. As a matter of fact, gold stocks, funds in gold stocks have been seeing outflows, even though we now have many gold mining companies with 50% operating margins. This is unheard of. The amount of cash flow that's going to be coming through with a lot of these mining companies is going to be tremendous. And we're going to see that as reports come in. And yet there's no interest in these companies, again, because of the tech sector. Now, I'm not going to speak specifically to whether or not the AI bubble got popped. I don't know enough about it. There's various articles I'm still reading, trying to figure out what's going on. But if the DeepSeek situation that the and the Chinese were able to do this for a lot cheaper, then yeah, this could be a problem. And that's another thing that I've talked about in the past, and I've always kind of had a burr under my saddle about this denigration of China. Like it just, makes, plastic doggy duty novelty stuff. It copies people. Hey, look, this is a legitimate country that has a space program and is becoming more and more has $1 trillion trade surplus last year, guys. They're dominating anything they get involved with. It's time to wake up to that fact, okay? And if you're ignoring that and listening to U.S. propaganda and Western propaganda and Western chauvinism, you're going to be, I think you're going to be making a big mistake investing wise. The United States has a lot of problems. It's not going to get fixed in 4 years. We are in terminal decline, regardless of what administration gets in there. Read the read Gibbon. When the Roman Empire was in decline, there were periods when certain emperors were in power where they arrested the decline for some period of time, but then it resumed. Okay. You're not going to make America great again. We have so many disadvantages and internal contradictions that really are not going to be able to be solved, regardless of who's in there. Your opponent, the left, has spent 3 generations inculcating itself in everything, media, education, government, everywhere. Okay. And so, yes, you're seeing these little headlines and okay, they fired all these people. We'll see if that actually, what happens if we have a stock market crash? What's going to happen if they don't get prices down? There's a lot of what ifs that are unanswered. Okay. What happened? This is why they're moving so quickly because they have to implement the agenda before again, you don't have 4 years, you have a year and a half till you get to start working up to the midterms. And the Democrats are already ramping up for that. So we'll see. But I think gold is really, a place to be. I think the other metals are looking good as precious metals. Silver, platinum looks really good in my mind. It's extremely undervalued, as I've said. Again, I don't know when it's going to make its move, but it could conceivably have a tremendous move. And so I've been accumulating it. So, yeah, but definitely something has changed in the gold market, and you can see what it was, which we've been talking about here. Again, gold just made a new all-time high. I expect it'll be making more highs. I don't make predictions on the price. I'm sure it's going to move higher. Some people are saying 3,000. I don't know, what will happen. But again, if you're a gold mining company and you can't make money at these gold prices, then you should get out of the business. That's all I can say. And like I said, there's many mining companies that are having tremendous operating margins at this gold price. So I want to show this about real estate. This isn't the exact thing what I'm talking about. You know, housing is a major component of the U.S. economy. And what we have here is the annual U.S. existing home sales from the National Association of Realtors. You're at 1995 levels. Why is this happening? Well, prices are too high. They need to come down. The other thing is that interest rates are high. When you have mortgage rates above 7% and houses are too expensive, this is what you get. Okay? Sales go down because people can't afford the houses. We need to reset prices downwards. I think that's going to happen. It's inevitable if you want to sell these houses, but we'll see. But this is a major reason why, I think that the economy is going to struggle. I mean, housing is such a large component. I know something like 15%, then all the ancillary spending that goes along with housing when you buy a new home. Uh, yeah. And it's like Who's paying attention to this? Here's another chart about housing. Glut of new homes for sale in the South is bigger even than during the housing bust. So here's the housing bust in 2007, 8, that time. And this is the new single family houses for sale in thousands. And you see that there's a glut of homes in the South. I mean, what's that telling you? Prices are too high. They need to come down. Will they? Well, we'll see. I remember several years ago when ESG and, green investing was the, flavor du jour, and people were creating all these ESG funds, not necessarily because the asset managers, companies that do asset management actually believe in it. They just saw it as a current flavor of the month, and, they create the funds. When the ducks quack, feed them. But what we see is here's a chart that shows U.S. sustainable funds suffer outflows as investors pull money in past 2 years amid political backlash to ESG. Well, there you go. This is exactly what I predicted would happen. You saw this big surge in spend in investing, and then it just drops right off because the whole thing's bunk. It's physics and math eventually, exerted themselves and, overcame the fantasies and, you know, basically the hot air. And so here you are. You're seeing outflows from this now. So this is another thing that's a problem. This is from the total assets held by the top 1% in blue from 1990, total assets held by the bottom 50%. And you see back here, it was pretty close, right? But you see over time that the top 1% control more and more of the assets. Well, why is that? And kind of goes back to what I said about the Cantillon effect. If you don't understand how this works, how the monetary system works, particularly in the US, and how the Cantillon effect of being close to the money printer or being whoever is closest to the king, as Cantillon said back in those days, was closest to the gold, and that's who made out. That's who did well. And I guess it's reframed in modern times as he who's closest to the freshly created money does well. You know, most people in the lower 50%, they don't have any assets, okay, because they're living hand to mouth. And so they don't feel the effect, the so-called wealth effect of inflating assets that's due to money printing, which has happened all along here from these various financial crises that we had and wars that we had, and how the Fed reacted by spending money or printing money. And that affects uh, asset prices. And that's why the wealthier kept getting wealthier. And that's why you've seen this divergence. Most people don't understand this. They have no clue how this works or what's happening. I think it was the February 2024 issue of the Actionable Intelligence Alert newsletter where I explained this, the Cantillon effect, and how this works. Who was Cantillon and his theory on this? But I would look at it again if you're not sure. It was just a primer. Obviously, I'm no expert, but I think that this explains quite a bit of it. Again, he who's closest to the printing press wins. So I will say this administration is moving quickly to do the things it said it was going to do. I find it humorous that, before this, I've always had this argument and pushback that this term of 10 to 11 million illegal aliens in the country, they use that since I was a kid. Okay. And I never believed it. I thought it was tremendously more than that. I think it's anywhere from 50 to 60 million at this point, or even more. There's a lot of people in here illegally. Okay. And I think it's humorous because anecdotally, you see, well, this is the inauguration, basically, uh, here. And since then, daily encounters of undocumented migrants without rep, repatriations and return to Mexico, basically down 93% in a couple weeks. So it was possible. It was just political will. That's what most of the problems are in this country. They're not they're not they're not like unsolvable. That's just political will. You want to solve inner city violence? Easy to solve. You have to bring a level of violence to that area with law enforcement. You have to shake down use and confiscate the guns. You have to incarcerate people. El Salvador showed the way. Well, we can't do that because these people are black and that would be racist. Okay, then continue to have gang violence and shootings. So it can be solved, but people don't want to solve the problems because the political, uh, it's political. And I think it's humorous because uh, you see these anecdotes on Twitter and TikTok. They showed I think it was a bimbo factory in Illinois. They make, it's a Mexican company conglomerate. They make pastries and snack cakes, and they actually make stuff I didn't know, like Thomas English muffins. Uh, like a couple days after Trump went into office and announced the crackdown, the parking lot was empty. This is a factory that runs 24/7. Parking lot's empty because so what we now have come to understand is many companies have been using illegal labor and getting away with it. Well, they're not going to be able to do that. And people are saying you're seeing it, like I've seen anecdotal videos like Home Depots and Walmart's completely empty. People, a large part of the population of this country is illegal. Okay. I saw a roofer in Florida was lamenting that all of his jobs got shut down because all of his guys didn't show up. So he willingly knew he was employing illegals, but he said he couldn't stay in business if he didn't do it. So he was violating federal law. Well, you're just going to have to hire. We have to bring back trade schools, and young men are going to have, be trained as. I remember when I was in high school, I was in a trade school program. They had a carpentry program, and those guys used to build a house every year as part of the class, and then they would move the house, sell it, and then move it somewhere. Somebody would use it. They built it right on the school grounds, up on blocks, and then they hauled it away. Okay, so you're going to have to bring all this back, and then you're going to have to pay people to actually do things. Okay, you're going to have to pay citizens to do it. That's Trump's demographic. His demographic and his base and constituency is not Wall Street and all these people. It's the average person, okay? It's the working classes, okay? And so yeah, now you're going to have to pay more wages. Well, you don't understand, John. Prices are going to go up. Yeah, I understand. I understand. Again, we'll just see how it shakes out. I don't think it'll be the end of the world. Well, who's going to, you see these liberal wine soaked these liberal women, their wine-soaked brains that aren't able to think clearly, complaining on TikTok about who's going to pick the grapes and lettuce, and they can't wait for all the MAGA people to, not be able to eat their salads. Well, unknown to this stoop and to most people is that for many years and decades, this country's had guest worker programs specifically for this. I talked about it when I grew up in southern Florida when they used to cut sugarcane by hand. Okay. The cane co-op would fly in Jamaican and Haitian workers for the cane cutting season. They would be housed away from the city in their own little block houses. They would come out and work. They would be paid, and at the end of the cane cutting season, they would return to Jamaica and Haiti. They wouldn't stay here. They wouldn't bring their families here. The same thing they had in Southern California and other places. Okay, so we can bring that back. We can continue that. You want to, you can come here, you can work the harvest, and then you go back. What's the problem? So, you're not going to, sit here for 25 years and, be here illegally and all the stuff that goes along with that. So we'll see how it works. Maybe it won't work. Maybe it'll blow up in our face and it will, but uh, I think this is amazing. This proves my point. Okay. There's just this one thing that most of the problems are solvable. These people just don't have the political will to do them, to make the hard decisions. Okay. And so, you want to give me a problem. I'll tell you how to solve it. And, but the political will's not there to do it. So anyway, I thought this was interesting. So this is something I found humorous. Uh, Remember when the Obama administration was getting rid of coal plants and people in West Virginia were screaming and hollering about uh, what are we going to do? This was mining state, and what are all these coal miners going to do? And all the smarmy coastal liberal big shots. Well, they can learn to code. They, said it's all flippantly. You can just learn to code. Okay, like that's a real answer for somebody. Well, here we go. Here's off of Reddit. It's some federal employee that's losing their job, or NGO employee that's tied to the grift of the federal budget. Says, I'm about to be laid off. Where do I even find a new job? Goes on, says, thanks to the executive orders issued by our greatest American patriot president and his overwhelming mandate of 49.9% of the vote, my company is going under because nothing screams America first quite like making thousands of Americans unemployed. Anyway, I have spent my entire 13-year career in the field of international development. I have no skills or experience outside of this field, and every job I have gotten has been through niche, industry-specific sites like Devix or ReliefWeb, and those sites won't be of any use to me because the entire international development industry is being destroyed. So, people of DC, where do normal people find normal jobs? Is it really as brutal as toiling through LinkedIn or Glassdoor? I have no idea where to look or what kind of jobs to even think about. So this is a perfect example of the grift that went on. These people really didn't even have real jobs or careers. International development, I'm not even going to get into the grift that was, US aid and all that, okay? I got news for this person. Why don't you learn to code? That's what people like you told us to do, okay? Hardworking people. When you took away the mining industry in West Virginia, you told us to go learn to code. Well, you can do that. I don't know, get a job as a line worker at Chipotle. World needs bartenders. Go apply to be working at a State Farm office in a strip mall selling insurance. I don't know what to tell you. You have to do like everybody else. This is the most pathetic last paragraph I've ever seen. I would just like to slap this person. So, people of DC, where do normal people find normal jobs? Is it really as brutal? It's not brutal to look for a job. You go find a job that and if sometimes if you're not, I don't know, get a job at Costco running a forklift, work your way up. There's all kinds of things to do. There's always jobs for people that want to work. This person really wasn't working before. That's the problem. Okay. And so this is the fate of a lot of these people. They don't really have any employable skills, so they're going to have to start all over at the bottom somewhere and work their way up. And they're going to actually have to show up and go to work and deal with all the crap that you have to deal with the boss at work and coworkers and jobs that, humping some job that you don't like most people in the country have to do. Welcome to our reality. And so I find this humorous. I shouldn't be this way, but I have a certain amount of Schadenfreude for these people. I like the woman that was the inspector general at the USDA. Her last name was Fong. They posted that somebody posted this. She got fired and and then she reported to work anyways. And so security escorted her butt out. That's it. You're done. So, I think there's going to be a lot of people with a rude awakening. And so we'll see. People are going to find out real quick, which is something I've said all along, that 90% of these people aren't needed for anything. All they do is they're like parasites that suck the life out of, the productive class, which is normal people out here that work. Okay. And then to complain that, I don't know what else to do. There's all kinds of jobs. You won't like a lot of them, but there are tons of jobs out there. And there's going to be even more now. Get a job at that bimbo factory making Thomas English muffins for 12.50 an hour and no benefits. You didn't have a problem when everybody else was stuck in those jobs. Well, like I said, there'll be plenty of more jobs now. So I think this is hilarious. It's not really funny. It's really disturbing to me. I'm going to aggravate some people here because I know people that I know and respect that listen to my channel. We have a very big disagreement on this Ukraine Russo-Ukraine war. Okay, but I'm going to say it now. It's over, guys. Okay, Trump's cutting this thing off. It's not a priority for his administration. If you watch the Military Summary channel, if you watch different channels that document what's going on day to day, the Russians are advancing. Chasiv Yar is now fallen. All one of the major cities in defenses in Southwest Donbass just fell the other day. Pokrovsk, the major logistics hub, is being surrounded. Uh, once these places have fallen, if you look at the defenses to the west of these cities, there's no prepared defenses that the Ukrainians have. Okay. And so now the money's being cut off to Ukraine by the United States, I think, as a way to motivate the Zelensky regime to have a dialogue with the Russians, which under the Ukrainian constitution that Zelensky pushed for, no one's allowed to talk to the Russians. In the meantime, the Russians continue to advance. And people that deny this are just not paying attention. And people are being killed in the thousands, soldiers for no reason. And if you look at the prepared defenses, like I said, behind these cities now, as these last cities fall, it's wide open all the way to the Dnieper River. Okay. And so here we have this, eventually, you have to think about what's going to be the outcome of this. Because we've been told for 3 years that Russia's economy is going to collapse, that the Russian army's on the verge of collapsing, that, just wait, put more sanctions on, these little drone attacks that we're gonna tank the Russian oil industry. They're attacking these refineries. Just wait, So when is this all going to happen? Okay. The bottom line is Ukraine has lost the war. The U.S. it's a new regime, a new administration that does not have this as a priority and does not want to become embroiled in this. Okay. I think that this administration has its priority as China and the new Monroe Doctrine of, the Western Hemisphere. That's my theory. Okay. They don't really want to deal with this. This is something that the Biden administration and the EU got involved with. And so the EU doesn't know what to do there. And, are they going to spend tens and hundreds of billions of dollars to try to keep this thing going? I was talking to someone the other day when we were talking about this. Here's where you're at, guys. And I don't even think this would work, but you'd have to deploy hundreds of thousands of EU and US troops, NATO troops, to the battle zone and engage the Russians. Does anybody in their right mind think that that's politically possible in the West? Do you think you're going to stand up in France or Germany, the Netherlands, and say, okay, that's it. This is this is getting ready to collapse. And because if we don't stop them now, we have to mobilize for all-out war with Russia. It's not going to happen. Okay. The West has totally been deindustrialized over the last generation. It doesn't have the ability to manufacture weapons at the same pace as the Russian Federation. It doesn't have the manpower and it doesn't have the political will to go to the next step. And so eventually this peace or terms will be, if you don't get a deal ASAP, then you're going to have terms that are just going to be superimposed upon you. It's going to continue until they're at the river, and then what? Then they're going to cross the river. I mean, you can run this through your mind. So what we have now is you're seeing the cracks, right, in the facade. This was an FT article. It says EU debates return to Russian gas as part of Ukraine peace plan. European officials are debating whether Russian pipeline gas sales to the EU should be restarted as part of a potential settlement to end the war against Ukraine, according to people familiar with discussions. Advocates of buying Russian gas argue it would bring down high energy prices in Europe, encourage Moscow to the negotiating table, and give both sides a reason to implement and maintain a ceasefire. Resuming exports to Europe would significantly boost Moscow's revenues. Before the war, flows through pipelines from Russia accounted for about 40% of the EU's total supplies. with Germany being the largest importer. Okay, so again, this is a misreading of what the Russians want. The Russians have been clear of what is required for them to stop the special military operation. The first four things have been said over and over. Demilitarization of Ukraine. That means Ukraine will not have a military. Okay, they will be a neutral state like Austria that will be codified in their constitution. They will not ever be able to have NATO bases and NATO personnel on their territory. Now, people are going to say back to me, you don't have the right to you. Yes. Okay. Then continue the war until it's imposed on you. Okay. If you want to get to a situation, if you want to cut a deal, or do you want to be like, Japan and Germany after World War II, there was no negotiations. A piece of paper was placed in front of the Japanese and the Germans, and they were told to sign it or else. That's what will happen here. Or you can cut a deal. The Russians, having spent as much blood and material, they're not in a political situation where they can allow a 10-year respite so that Ukraine can be rearmed by the EU and NATO, and then have to go through this again. I've heard soldier after soldier from the Russian Federation say the same thing when they've been asked. Patrick Lancaster asks these guys all the time when he's interviewing them, "Why are you fighting this war?" "So my children and grandchildren don't have to fight it." So, demilitarization of Ukraine. No NATO personnel or bases. No entrance into NATO, codified in the Constitution of Ukraine, like Austria. Okay, a neutral state. Denazification. Now, people don't like that term, but if you look at what the Russians mean by that, you'll understand. That means purging of all the Banderists from Western Ukraine from the government with that poisonous ideology. And if you don't understand what Stepan Bandera, who he was and what his ideology was, then you're not in the conversation, because that's what the Russians are talking about. And then an overall European security framework that takes into account Russia's concerns. Right now, none of those things are on the table. The NATO and the United States aren't even discussing that. So they're not even talking about the terms. And so the special military operation will continue. And Ukraine will lose increasingly amounts of men and territory. And when the territory will not be given back. Okay, it's not politically possible in Russia, for all of the sacrifice that the people have went through, that they're going to give any of this back. Why would they? They're winning the war. They don't have to negotiate. And so these clowns in the EU are talking about, well, as part of a ceasefire. There won't be a ceasefire. The Russians have said they cannot trust the West. Remember the Minsk agreements? The West went back they were guarantors of the Minsk agreement. And then we find out after the fact from Angela Merkel and Francois Hollande that it was just a delaying tactic so they could arm Ukraine. Okay? If you don't understand these things, if you're not even aware of them, how are you in the conversation? Reducing this to bad man Putin, Zelensky good man, is not productive. Okay? And so the special military operation will continue until, as Lavrov said the other day, and he said many times, and so is other people of the Russian leaders of the Russian Federation. Special military operation will continue until all facets are implemented. If you don't know what those are, you should study it up, because they've told the West many times what's required. There needs to be a overall European security framework that takes into considerations Russia's concerns. And people say, well, that doesn't matter. Okay, well, then it will continue. And people that want to come at me in the comments on this and say I'm pro-Russian, what is your solution? How are you going to win this war? You're not going to institute a draft and go on a wartime economy in Europe and the U.S. and send hundreds of thousands of men from Europe and the U.S. to fight in Donbass. If you think that's going to happen, it's not. And so what's your solution? The West is deindustrialized. They cannot produce enough weapons, even if the Ukrainians could supply the men. What is your solution? So you're going to have this shoved down your throat if that's what you think is going to happen. The Russians will continue to advance. Well, the retort is, the Russians aren't advancing. You're not paying attention then, okay? They've demilitarized the Ukrainian forces. The cursed pocket is shrinking day by day. The Ukrainians have lost 55,000 men there. How much longer do you think this should continue? And what is the end game if you're the Ukrainian government and NATO? What is your end game? You don't have one. And now the US is pulling out of this, just like I said they would. But why does President Trump want to end up wearing this thing? Okay, he's going to be end up, he doesn't want to be Nixon after, the Johnson administration got us into Vietnam, but then he had to clean up the mess. Just cut ties and walk away from it, and it'll wither on the vine. That's what's going to happen. So it's time to come up with a realistic, instead of these attack dogs like this woman from Estonia, these little chihuahuas that are allowed to run around loose in NATO and EU, or this crazy woman in the Czech Republic that said something crazy about we need to put sanctions on so heavy that a million people die like in Leningrad. I mean, what kind of this is not if this is the political class in Europe's attitude, then you're just going to have to deal with what's going to happen. And why would the Russians turn the gas back on? You already told them they've already made other arrangements. Okay, this gas is going to go other places. And in the meantime, like a place like Germany, you've totally destroyed and deindustrialized your economy to the point where it may not be able to be salvaged. Was it worth it? What were you trying to accomplish? What did you accomplish? So, I know this is a sensitive subject for many of the people that listen to my channel, but this is how it is. And so I'm curious, what is the plan? What is your plan that's realistic? Don't tell me, yeah, we just need to continue to send weapons. They don't have enough men. Okay, that's the problem. And you can't build an army while you're fighting a war. And so that's why the EU and these NATO want a ceasefire. So then they can, spend 5 or 10 years rearming and then do this all again. Well, the Russians are not going to allow that. And so if they have to keep advancing and continue the SMO until they forcibly, uh, make Ukraine take the terms, I mean, will Ukraine even exist after this war? That's the question. Because then you have Romania and Poland and Hungary have aspirations in Western Ukraine also. So we'll see. But the hypocrisy here gets on my nerves. We're going to sanction and cut the gas off, and now, well, maybe we should turn the gas back on now. Okay, that's it for this week, guys. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next week, hopefully without the flu symptoms and given another shot. Thank you for listening and talk to you next week.